Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. Now, as we head through the summer and early fall months, one of the key things to watch out for, air quality, and specifically wildfire smoke, ground ozone. We've got different kinds of bad air quality, and to kind of help us navigate bad air quality and what to do when we've got lower air quality. We've got Dr. Payal Kohli, our 9 News health expert, for a bit more on that. And I guess, Dr. Kohli, first of all, thanks for being here with us and explaining some of these important things to get into, but what are some of those top line things we should kind of keep in mind when it comes to bad air quality days and how to stay safe in them?
Yeah, Chris said the air quality has been so bad lately that thankfully it's been getting headlines and people have been realizing it. But really, one of the reasons that air quality can be so toxic to our health is because we can't see what's floating around in the atmosphere. And that particulate matter, which is one of the things that we get from wildfire smoke, it can actually go and settle into the little sacs of our lungs, the alveoli of our lungs, and trigger all sorts of downstream effects, including inflammation and others. So we're actually inhaling all those toxins, those poisons, directly into our lungs. Now, there's other types of air pollution as well. In addition to the particulate matter, there's the gases, the toxic gases, and the liquids as well that can be present in the air. And it's a mixture of both of those that really creates disease. And almost every study across the board has told us the more that we're exposed to these types of particles, the more our short-term and long-term health risks that we're likely to have.
Yeah, let's kind of break those down a little bit. So I think the shorter-term health risks are the ones that I think are a bit more prevalent and the ones that we tend to think about more. What are those specific short-term health risks?
So, if you think about it exposed to your eyes, to your nose, to your mouth and your throat and your lungs, it's irritation of all of our what we call mucous membranes. These are sort of the membranes that interact with the environment. So it gets into our eyes. It causes irritation of the eyes and dry eyes. It gets into our nose. We feel like stuffy nose. If it gets into our throat, we feel a bit of a scratchy throat. And then if it gets into the lungs, we can cough. We can have a little bit of shortness of breath. But all of those things can also in the short term increase, fatigue, headaches, dehydration, just a general feeling of malaise and feeling unwell. Those are the short-term risks. But if you look at the long-term risks, and a lot of the data that we look at long-term chronic exposure to air pollution comes from firefighters, actually, because they have a dose of bad air every single day.
Makes sense.
Over the course of many, many years. And you can see that it can affect our longevity. So we actually have a shortened lifespan if we're exposed to high levels of pollution on a chronic basis. It can increase risk for cardiovascular disease. And so it can cause heart attacks, it can cause strokes because it triggers all of that inflammation, and then chronic lung disease as well. This is particularly important in our children. When kids are exposed to pollutants and wildfire smoke and particulate matter, it can actually increase the development of asthma in kids. So it changes the way their lungs even develop, and it can cause asthma. We don't yet know some of the neurocognitive effects, but we suspect that there may be some, increased risk of dementia, memory problems, those types of things that may also come from being exposed to chronic pollutants.
And you mentioned these sorts of impacts, short-term, long-term. I think, and I'll speak for you here a little bit, that this is for the average person, right?
That's right. So you don't necessarily have to be sick. You don't have to be unhealthy. But if your dose of, particulate matter is high enough for a long enough period of time, we call it the area under the curve. The dose multiplied by the length of exposure, that really, it's that poison, how long it's working. So if it's a low level of pollution for many, many years, or a very high level of pollution for a short period of time, both of those can have adverse effects.
So what about maybe for asthmatics or sensitive breathing groups, maybe older people as well? Are there extra precautions those people should take?
So those people are automatically in a much higher risk group. If you think about asthmatics going out and getting exposed to pollutants, it can trigger asthma exacerbations, lead to an increase in hospitalizations, lead to worsening of your asthma control, not just acutely, but even over time. So you may need more medications to maintain it. When it comes to our older people, they have less lung reserve. And they have less of the inflammatory mechanisms to fight off the bad stuff as well. So the immune system is not as robust when you're older as it is when you're younger. So putting all that together, these individuals can be particularly high risk. Another group that we worry about quite a bit is pregnant women. Because their lung mechanics change because they're carrying the baby, so their lungs are actually compressed. Their immune system changes as well because your body tries not to reject the baby, so your immune system becomes somewhat kind of tolerant, less likely to sort of be triggered. And so the way that you react can be different. And then, of course, the exposure to the baby. So if mom is breathing in all this particulate matter, some of it can get into the bloodstream, create inflammation, which can then affect the baby through the placenta and through inflammatory markers as well. So that's also considered a high-risk group. So anyone with kind of underlying chronic lung or heart disease, I say, because people often think about lung disease, that's easy, you breathe it into your lungs. But even if you've had a history of heart attack, strokes, atrial fibrillation, any of chronic heart problems, congestive heart failure, you're considered a high-risk group as well.
When it comes to specific bad air quality, that's a big term, right? I mean, that can vary from ground ozone on a summer afternoon here in Denver to kind of that huge plume of wildfire smoke that we saw in New York City and the East Coast in early June 2023. Just to put that to you, are there certain levels of air quality where we need to kind of take more or less precautions?
I would say as soon as you're getting into the red zone, it's really important to be extremely vigilant. And that means limiting your dose. That is the biggest measure that we can take in terms of protecting ourselves, is limiting our time outside, limiting our dose. The other thing I really encourage people to do is not exercise outdoors. Of course, I'm a big fan of exercise, but when the air quality is bad, when you go outside and exercise, what do you think you're doing? You're breathing faster and you're breathing harder. So you're taking in bigger gulps of air and you're doing it at a faster rate because you're exercising. And putting that together means more particulate matter going into your lungs. If you're walking the dog, you have to protect yourself, even if you're out for just a few minutes or if it's a bad period of time. So what I suggest to my patients is listen to the meteorologist. If they say that the air quality is going to be bad until 4 p.m., you really have to stay indoors, keep those windows closed, make sure your AC is not entraining air from outside, and protect yourself in that way. If you are going to go outside, then you need to cover up, wear a mask that filters out many of those small particulate matters, many but not all, and really, again, try to minimize the time that you're spending outdoors.
Any specific kind of mask that people should be wearing? Are there ones that are specifically designed to counter bad air quality?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of the surgical masks in New York City and other that people are wearing at this time, and I would say those are not nearly as effective as an N95 or N100.
Okay.
And that's those stiffer masks that are thicker and that actually have ionized particles inside of them that can trap dust and pollution better than just a surgical mask. The fit, of course, is tighter, so you have less of a leak around the mask as well. You've got two straps, one around your head and one at the base of the head. So it's a much, much tighter fit. And then the shape and the stiffness of the mask also make it less likely to entrain bad, unhealthy air. Because the last thing you want to do is to wear a suboptimal mask and trap some of that dirty air inside the mask and then keep rebreathing it as well. So a bad mask can actually do harm. That's what I say. If you really want to protect yourself, you really need to upgrade that mask.
Okay, so know the mask and get that N95 and 100, right? Those are the two.
Those are the two that'll protect you the best. That's right.
Okay, let's say we're at home.
Yeah.
Are there certain air filters that we should be getting or thinking about? So, you're saying stay indoors, but what sort of air are we breathing in here and how is that filtered?
You do get contamination of indoor air with outside pollutants, especially when the levels are so high outside. It's impossible to avoid it. So if you are going to run any kind of AC, again, you want to make sure that you're not entraining air from outside. I strongly recommend the HEPA filters because they really do a good job, at least of some of those larger particulate matters in terms of filtering them out. You should try not to blow any kind of air on your face, whether it's AC or anything like that. Of course, when you're in your car, don't roll down your windows or anything, because that again does the same sort of effect. Similarly with the air conditioning in the car, you don't want to be sucking in air from outside and be breathing it. But it is really difficult because even in our home environment where we feel protected, so to speak, there could be potential exposure to pollution when the climate is so bad that we have so much pollution in the air.
With a warming climate as well, this will be something that unfortunately may become more and more of a reality in coming months, years, right?
That's one of our concerns, honestly. I think that we have seen a trend over time to more wildfires, more of these types of situations with poor air quality, and unfortunately a lack of education and a lack of empowerment for people to really wake up and take it seriously. I mean, I had patients in my office just yesterday where we had, bad air quality, who I asked them, if they knew that it was bad air quality, they had not even understood what that means. And so I think education is a big piece of it. The other piece of this is research, Chris. It's really, really hard to do randomized trials where you randomize somebody to being exposed to air pollution versus not. So a lot of our data, our scientific information about the risks and how to mitigate them comes from association studies, just watching populations over time, looking at climates where there's a lot of air pollution versus those where there isn't, and just kind of doing our best to adjust for other variables or confounders that could be affecting it. But I do think more systematic research, whether that's laboratory research or basic science research, about some of the effects of these pollutants in our lungs, how we can mitigate them. Are there medications? Are there other things that we could do to really help protect our lungs, protect our entire cardiovascular system and our body at times when the air quality is high? Those are things I'm hoping that the scientific community starts to explore as we see more of these wildfires occurring.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, something that may increase here in coming years and decades, we were just talking about. Any final things we should kind of keep in mind, maybe health-related impacts from bad air quality?
You know, what these pollutants do, it's not just the inflammation that we talk about. They actually change the way that our genetics are expressed, and that's called epigenetics. So, you know, we have our genes. Think about that like the hardware of the computer. But what the genes are exposed to, whether that's cigarette smoke or alcohol or marijuana, or in our case, air pollution, as it's been right now, is the software. It changes the way the genes are expressed. And it can cause premature aging and all kinds of host of health problems like we talked about. So I really, really hope that people take this seriously. And just because it's a silent threat and you can't see those particles in the air doesn't mean that they're not a threat to us. So really listen to your meteorologist. Listen to what the air quality index is every single day. That's part of my daily routine when I think about, you know, whether or not I'm going to spend time outside. Of course, you want to hear the weather, but you also want to hear what the air quality index is so that you can prepare yourself, plan your day around it, wear that N95 or N100 if you need to be outside. But if you don't need to be outside, it might be a day to spend more time inside the office.
To spend that time inside, and the best advice you gave there, listen to your meteorologist.
That's right.
Not that I'm biased or anything about that, but Dr. Payal Kohli, seriously, very helpful information. Also, I learned a lot there. I did not know the kind of wide range of the impacts from air quality, so it's really helpful. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Chris.